My husband spent 20 years restoring that Mustang. It was his heartbeat on wheels, our Saturdays, our story. The morning I opened the garage and saw it gone, I thought I'd gone blind. My son stood there, calm as stone, and said, "I sold it. My wife wanted Rome. Get over it." I felt Robert's memory vanish with that car. But the next day, the dealership owner called. He said, "Ma'am, your husband left something inside." And that call changed everything. My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 70 years old, and I have learned that grief can change its costume. Sometimes it wears a black dress. Sometimes it sounds like your own child's voice. Robert and I built our life in Asheville, North Carolina, inside a cedar house that smells of coffee and rain. He was a craftsman with patient hands and an impossible dream to bring a broken 1968 Mustang Fastback back to life. Over 2 decades, he did it bolt by bolt, a ritual that outlasted sickness, bills, and time itself. Ethan, our son, used to crouch beside him, a boy in sneakers and curiosity. I still see Robert guiding his hands, showing him how to sand the fender without anger. They spoke in the language of engines and trust. When Robert died, the car became more than a machine. It was a living piece of him. Every morning I would open the garage door, see that red shine, and feel Robert close enough to touch. That morning the space was empty. I could see the outline in the dust where the tires had rested for years. The air smelled of oil and loss. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echo off the walls. Ethan's words, "I sold it. My wife wanted Rome," hung between us like smoke. I wanted to believe he was joking, that grief had made me misunderstand. But his eyes were steady, almost impatient. I asked how much. He shrugged and said, 15,000. The number was so absurd it felt like another betrayal. That car was worth far more, but even if it weren't, it was never for sale. It was family history, sweat, memory, love in metal form. I told him that. He said, "Mom, it's just a car. You can't drive the past." Then he left before I could answer. For a long moment, I stood there in the silence he left behind. The tools still hung in neat rows on the pegboard, the ones Robert polished after every use. The floor still bore the faint stain of the first oil change they did together. I realized then that I had spent years giving Ethan everything, money, time, forgiveness, and somewhere in that giving, I had lost my boundaries. I had become a mother who was easy to disappoint because I never demanded anything better. The ache was not just for the car, it was for the dignity I had misplaced while calling it love. I pressed my palm to the cold workbench and whispered, "Enough." For the first time in years, the word did not sound angry, it sounded free. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing Robert's face in the glow of the old photographs that lined the hallway. His eyes, kind but steady, seemed to ask what I was going to do about it. By dawn, I decided to call the police and report the sale. But before I could, the phone rang. A man's voice said, "Mrs. Hayes, this is Michael Grant from Grant Classic Motors. I bought a 1968 Mustang from your son yesterday. I thought you should know. It didn't feel right." I gripped the phone tighter. He continued, "Your husband helped me years ago. I didn't realize until I saw the restoration tag on the frame. That car is worth far more than what your son asked, but that's not why I'm calling. Your husband left something inside." The words settled into me like thunder after lightning. My breath caught. "What do you mean?" I asked. "There's a hidden compartment in the dashboard. He had it installed himself. I think you should come by." I hung up slowly, my pulse loud in my ears. For a moment, the house felt alive again, as if Robert were standing just behind me, waiting for me to follow the thread he had left. I looked at the garage through the kitchen window, the empty space glowing faintly with the first light of morning. And I knew the story of that car was not finished. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands trembling. The steam rose in curls like questions I was finally brave enough to ask. Love, betrayal, justice. They were all waiting under the hood of a car that should never have been sold. And I was done being quiet. Some losses tear a hole so deep that the truth finally has room to speak. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. The road to Grant Classic Motors wound through the edges of Asheville, where the morning mist still clung to the trees like old secrets. I drove Robert's pickup, the one that smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles burned white. I kept hearing Michael Grant's voice replaying in my head, that calm certainty. Your husband left something inside. I did not know whether to expect a letter, a trinket, or a cruel misunderstanding. Still, hope flickered beside fear in my chest, like twin candles. The sign for the dealership appeared just beyond a cluster of warehouses. The building was a low brick structure with glass windows that reflected the pale sky. Rows of classic cars lined the lot, machines that seemed to hum with stories of their own. I parked, stepped out, and the air hit me with the cold bite of metal and oil. Inside, Michael Grant looked older than his voice, maybe in his late 60s, with silver hair and a steady way of moving. His hands bore the kind of permanent grease that never fully washes away. When he saw me, he straightened, wiping them on a rag. "Mrs. Hayes?" "Yes," I said. My voice barely made it across the space between us. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. I recognized the car the moment I saw it. Robert Hayes saved my business years ago, loaned me a piece of equipment I couldn't afford back then. I owed him more than I ever repaid. The mention of Robert's name made my throat tighten. "You said there was something inside?" He nodded. "Come with me." We walked through the showroom until we reached the Mustang. Seeing it again stole the air from my lungs. The deep red paint glowed under the lights, and for an instant I half expected Robert's reflection beside mine in the window. I touched the door handle, and memory hit like electricity. Michael unlocked the driver's side and leaned into the dashboard. "Robert asked me to install a small compartment years ago. Said it was for documents only. I never asked questions." He pressed a hidden latch under the steering column, and with a faint click, a narrow panel slid open. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's familiar script. The ink had faded slightly, but the loops of his handwriting were unmistakable. Beneath the envelope lay a thin leather folder tied with a strip of cord. My knees almost gave way. Michael stepped back respectfully. I didn't open it. I figured it wasn't my place. "Thank you," I whispered. I held the envelope for a long moment, feeling the weight of years pressing through the paper. The garage, the empty mornings, the ache of loss, all of it seemed to gather right there in my hands. I sat in the driver's seat, breathing in the familiar scent of oil and leather. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. The first line of Robert's letter read, "If you're reading this, it means the car found its way back to where it belongs." I stopped there, heart pounding. His voice came alive in my head, calm and certain, the way he used to explain complicated repairs to me. He wrote about love, but also about suspicion. He had begun to notice things before he died. Documents moved, emails erased, conversations that ended when he walked into a room. He didn't want to worry me then, but he believed someone close to us was not who they claimed to be. I felt the world tilt. I looked at Michael, who was quietly pretending to check paperwork across the room. "He knew something," I said softly. Michael nodded without turning. Robert always noticed the details everyone else missed. I slid the leather folder from the compartment and untied the cord. Inside were photographs, copies of driver's licenses, and what looked like marriage records under a different name. My pulse quickened. Sabrina's face appeared in one of the photos, standing beside another man, someone I had never seen. The caption on the printed document beneath it read, "Linda Benton, alias used in California, 2012. The world went soundless. Only the hum of the fluorescent lights remained. Robert had been right. I looked back at the letter. He had written, "If she's still around Ethan, be careful. Protect him from what I couldn't stop in time. She's dangerous." Tears burned behind my eyes, not just from heartbreak, but from the sudden understanding that Robert had seen the storm coming and tried to build me a shelter I never knew existed. Michael's voice broke the silence. "Mrs. Hayes, there's more. He mentioned a safe deposit box, said the key was with the car's registration." He held out a small brass key attached to an old tag. I took it carefully. "He really thought of everything," I said. Michael nodded. He always did. I stood beside the car for a while, tracing the smooth edge of the fender. I realized Robert hadn't just restored a vehicle. He had built a message, one only love and time could decode. I whispered, "Thank you, my love." Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain and gasoline. The road home waited, but I knew I was no longer the same woman who had arrived an hour ago. The truth had started its engine, and there was no turning it off. Some people leave flowers when they go. My husband left me the courage to face what was hidden. The drive back from Grant Classic Motors felt longer than it should have. The road blurred between the weight of memory and the pulse of revelation. The letter sat on the passenger seat, folded neatly, as if Robert were riding beside me, keeping time with the steady rhythm of the wipers. I caught myself glancing at it every few miles, whispering questions into the silence. He had known. He had tried to warn me. By the time I reached home, the clouds had thickened into a gray ceiling. I parked the truck and carried the envelope inside, setting it carefully on the kitchen table. The smell of coffee from that morning still lingered, faint and familiar. I sat there for a long moment before I called Ethan. He answered on the third ring, his tone already defensive. "Mom, I told you—" I cut him off. "Ethan, I went to see the dealership owner, Michael Grant." He paused. "Why would you do that?" "Because he called me," I said. "Because your father left something inside that car." The silence stretched. Then, in a voice that tried to sound dismissive, he asked, "What are you talking about?" "A letter," I said evenly, "and documents. Your father was looking into Sabrina before he died." Ethan laughed, too quickly. "Mom, that's ridiculous. Sabrina wasn't even around back then." "Your father's handwriting doesn't lie," I said. He knew something wasn't right. He inhaled sharply on the other end. "Mom, you're letting your grief get the best of you. You're seeing patterns that aren't there. I sold a car." "That's it." "No," I said quietly. "You sold a memory, and you might have sold your father's warning with it." The line went dead before I could say more. I sat at the table staring at the brass key Michael had given me. "Safe deposit box," the letter had said. Robert's last attempt at protecting us was waiting somewhere, locked behind a metal door. I needed to find out what he had hidden and why. The next morning, I drove to the bank downtown. The clerk behind the counter, a woman with kind eyes, led me to a small private room. The key trembled in my hand as I turned it in the lock. Inside the narrow box lay another envelope and a stack of neatly folded documents. On top of them, a note in Robert's script. "For Margaret, when the truth becomes too loud to ignore." I opened it with careful fingers. Inside were stock certificates, property deeds, and something else, a list of names. There were at least 6, all women. Each name was followed by a city and a brief note. Widow, retirement account emptied, house sold under false pretense. My eyes stopped on the last one. Linda Benton, alias active 2012-2015. The same name from the folder, the same woman. Sabrina. A chill spread through me. Robert had been tracking her for nearly 2 years before his death. He must have discovered her history of fraud and deceit and left the evidence where he knew it would eventually find me. When I left the bank, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time since the car disappeared, I felt less like a victim and more like a participant in my own story. My husband had trusted me with the final piece of his puzzle. Now it was my turn to use it. At home, I sat on the porch with the documents spread across my lap. The autumn wind moved through the trees like an old hymn. I could see Ethan's car in the driveway when he pulled in later that evening. He looked tired, almost haunted. "Mom," he said quietly, walking up the steps. "Sabrina's been acting strange all day. She keeps getting calls she won't answer." I met his eyes. "She's not who you think she is, Ethan." He frowned, his face a mix of confusion and fear. "What are you talking about?" "Your father left proof," I said. "He was trying to protect you. We both were." He looked down at the papers in my hands and then back at me. His mouth opened, but no words came. The boy who used to fix cars with his father was still there, buried under the man who had made terrible choices. I saw both of them fighting in his eyes. "I need you to listen to me," I said softly. "If we're going to make this right, you have to trust me now. No more lies." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then slowly, he nodded. "What do you want me to do?" I took a breath. "We start by finding out who she really is." The sun dipped behind the mountains, leaving the porch in quiet amber light. I looked at my son and felt a fragile thread of hope pull tight between us. Justice was no longer a distant word. It was a direction. Some truths wait for the right hands to lift them into daylight. Mine were finally steady enough to do it. That night, the house didn't feel like home anymore. Every creak of the floor sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like a whisper from the past. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, Robert's letter, the photographs, the list of names. The evidence glowed faintly under the lamplight, too real to deny. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman sleeping beside my son was studying her next move. Ethan paced by the window, restless. "Mom, you're saying she's a con artist? That she's been doing this for years?" I looked up. "Yes. She's used at least 2 other names. She marries men, drains their families, and moves on before anyone catches her." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "No, she loves me. I'd know if she was lying." "Would you?" I asked gently. "Because your father knew something wasn't right. He saw what I refused to see." Ethan stopped pacing. "Why didn't he tell me?" "He didn't want to lose you," I said. "He thought if he gave her enough rope, she'd hang herself with her own lies." The words landed heavy between us. Outside, the streetlights buzzed faintly, and a dog barked somewhere down the block. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Ethan rubbed his eyes, exhaustion softening his defiance. "What do we do now?" "We get help," I said. "Someone who knows how to handle people like her." He looked at me skeptically. "You mean the police?" "Not yet," I said. "We need proof she's still doing it, someone who can trace her steps." That's when I thought of Detective Alan Brewer, one of Robert's old friends from his volunteer work at the Veterans Center. A man who owed Robert more than one favor. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I still had written in the back of my address book. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and gravelly. "Brewer. Alan. It's Margaret Hayes." A pause. Then warmth. "Margaret? I haven't heard that name in years. How are you holding up?" "I need help," I said simply. "It's about my son's wife." An hour later, Alan sat across from me at the kitchen table, his notebook open, his eyes scanning the papers like a surgeon preparing for delicate work. Ethan watched from the doorway, wary but listening. Alan finally looked up. "You were right to call me. This woman's been using aliases in at least 3 states, California, Nevada, and Florida. She changes her name, marries into families with assets, drains accounts, and disappears. She's wanted for questioning in 2 ongoing fraud cases." Ethan's face went pale. "You're saying she's dangerous?" Alan nodded. "Financially, yes. Emotionally, even more. These people are good at turning love into leverage." I felt a sting in my chest at those words. That was exactly what she'd done. Used love as a weapon. I reached for the stack of photographs and handed one to Alan. "Can you find out where she's been getting those calls? Ethan says they're from unknown numbers." He studied the photo and smiled faintly. "I'll see what I can do. I still have friends in digital forensics." After Alan left, Ethan sat in silence. His voice when it came was small. "I can't believe I didn't see it." I looked at him softly. "You wanted to believe in her. We all want to believe love makes us safe. But sometimes love makes us blind." He nodded, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know," I said, "but saying sorry isn't enough. You have to help me make this right." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the clock tick, wondering how long it would take for Sabrina to realize that the walls were closing in. The house, once a refuge, now felt like a stage where every object had its cue. At dawn, Ethan came into the kitchen, eyes red, determination in his posture. "She's going out today," he said. "I'll follow her if you want." I shook my head. "No, that's Alan's job now. You just stay close to her, act normal. We'll let the truth reveal itself." He hesitated, then nodded. "You really think she could hurt us?" "People like her don't need to throw punches to hurt someone," I said. "They just take until there's nothing left to steal." The phone rang at noon. Alan's voice came through, steady but urgent. "Margaret, I traced one of the numbers calling Sabrina. It belongs to a man in Arizona, one of her former husbands. He filed a police report 2 years ago. She cleaned out his savings and vanished." I felt the blood drain from my face. "So it's true. Every word of it." "It's worse," Alan said. "She's already talking to a real estate agent. She's planning to sell your house." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the counter and forced the words out. "Then we stop her." Alan's voice was calm. "We will. But you need to be ready. She's not going to go quietly." I hung up and turned toward Ethan, who was standing in the doorway, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom," he whispered, "what are we going to do?" I looked at him, my voice steady now. "We're going to fight for what's ours. Your father gave us the tools. Now we use them." Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the first drops of rain hit the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt alive, awake, and ready for justice. Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to clear what's been poisoning your peace. Alan moved like someone who had spent his life stitching wounds. He called in favors, arranged meetings, and kept his tone steady so I could believe the plan would work. Within a day, he had tracked down 2 women from Robert's list. They drove in from cities I had only seen on paper, faces mapped with the same hard lessons. When they stepped into my kitchen, it felt like a small courtroom of survivors. Their eyes met mine, and for a moment the room hummed with the quiet power of company that understood. Joanna from Florida was the first to speak. Her voice had a brittle edge, softened by time. "She married my brother," Joanna said. "Sold the house the same week he got sick. We found the account empty. They told us she was grieving, that she needed to move on. The signatures were all hers." Next to her, Maria from Nevada nodded. "She changed her name 3 times while I was trying to get back on my feet. She never touched the kids, only the paperwork." Each story fit like a ragged tile into the pattern Robert had sketched for me. Ethan hovered by the doorway, pale and small, a son who suddenly felt both guilty and betrayed. He kept his hands in his pockets like a teenager trying to hide. "I wish I had seen it sooner," he said once, so low only I could hear. "I thought I was giving her the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to believe she loved me." Those words, 1 part apology, 2 parts confession, hurt in a different way than anger would have. I reached for his hand and did not let it go. "You did what you thought was right," I said. "Now we do what is right." There is dignity in that exchange. Dignity does not erase what was lost, but it draws a line where respect can be rebuilt. Alan laid out our options. We could confront her directly, try to catch her in a lie, or we could move legally and get an injunction to stop the sale of the house. He recommended both. The legal route would buy us time and remove her ability to liquidate what remained. The public route would make her scramble. He called a lawyer he trusted and set the wheels in motion. Meanwhile, I called the real estate agent who had been in contact with Sabrina. Her voice was bright and practiced. When I told her who I was, the color in the woman's tone shifted. "Mrs. Hayes, I thought you were out of town," she said. "Sabrina told me you wanted to downsize eventually." "I never authorized a sale," I said. "You need to pause all actions on that property." My voice did not tremble. It had a new, hard edge I did not know I owned. The agent hesitated only a second before saying she would place a hold until she checked with the title company. I did not wait for her. I went to the county recorder's office with the paperwork from Robert's safe deposit box and a copy of the sales agreement Ethan had signed. The clerk was a woman in her 40s with 3 children's doodles taped to her desk. She took one look at the documents and then at me. "We can put a temporary restriction," she said. "You will need an order from a court, But I can flag it, so no transfers go through until it is resolved. Flagged, paused, delayed. Those small bureaucratic words felt like planks laid across a chasm. I felt the house, and with it Robert's life, steady under my feet for the first time since the Mustang disappeared. Sabrina watched these moves with the kind of cool that belongs to people used to having their way. She came home that evening with a look that had the practiced softness of a woman who could cry on cue. She tried to steer conversations toward repairs needed in the house, toward furniture arrangements and paint samples. Each attempt was a small, careful push toward speed. She grew impatient when answers did not come quickly enough. Ethan began to notice the tiny manipulations. He told me how she would touch the document rack when he turned away, how she would leave the room the moment their financial calls came in. He was seeing her as Robert had seen her, careful with people, careless with the truth. Alan brought more evidence. He had found a trail of wire transfers under slight variations of Sabrina's name, modest amounts sent to accounts in other states, patterns that looked exactly like the way a con takes a shape over time. The paper trail was not poetry. It was arithmetic and repetition. It made my blood run cold. Yet what surprised me most was how my own body answered. I did not crumble. I did not become the exhausted apologetic woman who had once been willing to be a mother as bank, dispensing credit until there was none left. I felt something else rise up, an interior strength built on years of quiet endurance. Saying no felt less like loss and more like reclamation. Putting boundaries around my life felt like reclaiming dignity. When the lawyer filed for an injunction, Sabrina's composure finally started to crack. She arrived that afternoon with a friend who pretended to be a cousin. The friend's hands fluttered like a stage prop. Sabrina's smile was thin. The room sensed it and recoiled a little. The legal papers had landed like cold water. Ethan stood up then, no longer the embarrassed son, but a man who had seen the damage and chosen to stand with the people trying to repair it. He confronted her gently at first, then with increasing firmness. "You need to leave," he said. "Until this is sorted, we cannot live like this." Her face had the blankness of someone who believed she could charm a storm into passing. She left that night, furious and loud. She packed her things as if she were gathering proof of innocence and slamming a door. As she drove away, I watched Ethan go to the window and put his forehead to the glass. He was grieving in his own way. We were not finished, but we had moved from shock to action. We had started to put an end to what had been quietly taking from us. Some moments in life demand courage not because they are dramatic, but because they are true. We had found the courage to defend ourselves, to insist on respect, and to begin the work of repair. Morning came, dressed in silence. The house felt lighter, like it was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Sabrina's perfume still lingered in the hallway, a ghost of false sweetness. I stood by the window with a mug of coffee, watching the first light touch the driveway where her car had been. Part of me wanted to collapse, to surrender to the exhaustion of everything we had uncovered. But another part, the one Robert had loved most, refused to bend. Ethan came into the kitchen wearing the same clothes from the night before. He looked hollowed out, like someone who had run a marathon through his own mistakes. "She's gone," he said quietly. "I know." He sat across from me, elbows on the table, fingers tangled in his hair. I kept thinking if I just loved her enough, she'd stop needing more. Money, attention, control. But I was the one who couldn't stop giving. I reached across the table and touched his wrist. "You learned from me," I said. "I made the same mistake. We both confused love with surrender." He nodded slowly, eyes red. "She took so much from you. From Dad. From me. She can't take what we're reclaiming," I said. "That part's ours." Alan arrived mid-morning, his trench coat still damp from the rain. He looked tired but satisfied. "The injunction held," he said. "The sale's frozen." The sheriff's office flagged her name with the State Fraud Division. "She'll be under watch if she tries to move again." I poured him a cup of coffee, my hands steadier than they had been in weeks. "Do they think she'll come back?" "Not if she's smart," he said. "But these people rarely stop until they're cornered." He slid a small envelope across the table. I found something else in her rental car, printouts of your bank statements. She was planning to clean you out next. Ethan flinched, guilt tightening his shoulders. She had access through me. I'm sorry, Mom. I looked at him firmly. You're not the one who forged love into a weapon. Stop carrying her crimes. Alan studied us quietly before saying, You both should get some rest. The hardest part is over. But I knew he was wrong. The hardest part wasn't fighting her. It was facing what she had revealed about us, how we let people drain our worth because we mistake generosity for grace. I thought of all the times I had stayed silent, convincing myself that patience was strength. It wasn't. It was fear dressed as virtue. That afternoon, I walked to the garage. The empty space no longer looked like loss. It looked like a beginning. Sunlight poured through the open door, falling across Robert's old workbench. I ran my fingers over the wood, the smooth grooves worn by his hands. The Mustang was gone again, temporarily held at Grant Classic Motors for evidence, but its absence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like an echo waiting to return. I sat on the stool and unfolded Robert's letter once more. His handwriting shimmered in the light. You have always been braver than you know, he had written. Don't let anyone make you smaller to fit their comfort. Love deeply, but draw your lines in permanent ink. I smiled through the tears. He had known me better than I knew myself. The phone rang around 3. Alan's voice was brisk. Margaret, we have her. She tried to buy a ticket out of Charlotte under another alias. The airport police confirmed her ID. She's in custody. For a moment, the world went perfectly still. Then the relief came. Not the loud kind that breaks you, but the quiet kind that rebuilds. Ethan walked in as I hung up. What is it? She's been arrested, I said. He exhaled, a mix of disbelief and grief. I don't even know how to feel. You don't have to know, I said. Just start by forgiving yourself. He sat beside me, and for the first time in months, he rested his head on my shoulder the way he had when he was little. We stayed that way for a long time, 2 people who had finally stopped pretending everything was fine. That night, as rain swept through the trees, I opened the garage door and let the storm roll in. I wanted the air to wash away what was left of her lies, the smell of wet earth mixed with oil, and somewhere in it I felt Robert's presence, steady, patient, proud. I whispered into the rain, It's over, love. We found her. We finished what you started. And for the first time in years, the house didn't echo back my loneliness. It echoed my strength. Some victories don't come with applause. They come with peace. The next morning, the sky over Asheville broke open into a pale, forgiving blue. I woke earlier than usual, my mind already turning through what the day might bring. There was a quietness in the air that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned, the kind that only arrives after a storm has done its damage and left you standing, still whole, in the debris. Ethan came downstairs, his hair uncombed, his expression tentative. She called, he said. My heart skipped. From jail? He nodded. She said it was all a misunderstanding. She said you set her up. I stirred my coffee slowly, feeling the anger rise, but choosing calm instead. And what did you say? I told her not to call again, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. She started crying, Mom. It sounded so real. I reached across the table. Of course it did. She's made a life out of turning pity into profit. Don't let her drag you back there. He looked down. I just wanted it to be love. I know, I said softly. But love without honesty is a performance, not a promise. He gave a small, sad laugh. Dad used to say that. Yes, I said. And now it's your turn to live it. Alan stopped by later with paperwork and updates. Sabrina, now confirmed as Laura Benton, was facing federal fraud charges. He told us she'd likely serve time in a women's correctional facility in Georgia. It's not about revenge, Alan said. It's about accountability. I don't want her destroyed, I replied. I just want her stopped. Alan smiled faintly. That's the difference between justice and vengeance. You're on the right side of it. After he left, Ethan and I took a slow walk down to the workshop. The air smelled of sawdust and spring rain. The Mustang would return soon, the dealership keeping it safe until the investigation was officially closed. Still, we went there every day, as if the space itself were waiting to be reclaimed. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. You know, I always thought Dad's projects were just hobbies, but now I get it. He wasn't fixing metal. He was fixing patience. I smiled. He believed things could be made whole again if you cared enough to do the work. We spent the rest of the morning sorting through boxes Robert had left behind. Old notebooks, paint samples, parts lists, and one small Polaroid of the three of us standing beside the half-finished car. In the photo, Ethan is 12, grease on his cheek, his arm around Robert's waist. My own smile looks unguarded and young. For a moment, I could feel the air of that afternoon again. Sunlight on bare arms, laughter over the sound of tools. Ethan held the photo carefully. He'd hate what happened between us. He'd love what we're doing now, I said. We're fixing what's left. He nodded, slipping the photo into his wallet. I want to rebuild the car with you when it comes back. Properly this time. I felt tears sting my eyes. Then that's what we'll do. The following week, Michael Grant called. Mrs. Hayes, he said, the Mustang's ready whenever you want to bring it home. It's been cleaned, detailed, and cleared by the investigators. She's all yours again. When the flatbed truck pulled into the driveway that Friday afternoon, the neighborhood kids gathered to watch. The car rolled down the ramp, gleaming under the sunlight, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. I stood beside Ethan, my hand gripping his arm. Welcome home, I whispered. Ethan smiled through tears. It looks just like when Dad finished it. We pushed the car gently into the garage, the tires settling into the same spots they had always known. The engine gave a low, steady hum when Ethan turned the key, like the sound of forgiveness starting to take shape. Later that evening, after the neighbors drifted away, I stood alone beside the car. I ran my fingers along the polished hood, feeling the smoothness, the life it carried back to me. You did it, Robert, I said quietly. You kept us safe, even from the people we loved most. The wind moved through the trees outside, carrying the faint scent of magnolia and oil. The ache in my chest was still there, but it was no longer sharp. It had softened into gratitude, a strange, full kind of peace. Inside, Ethan was making dinner. I could hear the clatter of dishes, the small, everyday sounds that mean life has resumed its ordinary rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to fix everything around me. Some lessons only come after you've lost enough to see what truly matters. I sat in the driver's seat and closed my eyes. I could almost feel Robert's hand resting over mine on the gear shift, the same steady warmth I had leaned on for decades. Freedom, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the sound of an engine coming back to life. The days that followed felt like the long exhale after years of holding my breath. The Mustang was home, polished and silent, parked exactly where it belonged. Every morning I opened the garage door just to look at it, to remind myself that some stories really do circle back to where they began. But it wasn't the same car anymore, and I wasn't the same woman. What had once been a symbol of loss had become a testament to survival. Ethan was different too. He started coming by after work, small steps toward rebuilding something we had both taken for granted. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We just worked on the car together, hands moving in quiet rhythm. He asked questions about Robert, what kind of music he listened to while working, what he'd eat when he took breaks. I answered with a softness that surprised me. There was no more bitterness left to give, only the slow rebuilding of trust. One evening, Ethan looked up from tightening a bolt and said, I used to think Dad loved that car more than anything. I smiled. He didn't love the car, Ethan. He loved what it meant. Commitment, care, the patience to make something right. He nodded, eyes glistening. I wish I had that kind of patience. You're learning it now, I said. Sometimes we only understand a person's lessons after they're gone. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, I don't deserve how much you've forgiven me. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing peace over poison. That night, after he left, I sat in the living room with Robert's letter once again. I had read it so many times I knew the rhythm of every word, but this time, one line hit differently. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to keep accepting what hurts. I folded the letter slowly, feeling its weight lessen. I realized that for most of my life, I had confused silence with strength. Now I understood that true strength had a voice, and it sounded like me saying, "No more." The phone rang later that night. It was Alan checking in. "She pled guilty," he said. "No trial. She'll serve 12 years in a federal facility." For a moment, I said nothing. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but what I felt was relief, the calm kind that comes when justice finally matches the truth. "Thank you, Alan," I said, "for everything." He chuckled softly. "It wasn't me, Margaret. You did the hard part. You stood up." After the call, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, the kind of mountain air that smells like pine and rain. The wind moved gently through the leaves, whispering the kind of sound that only peace can make. I closed my eyes and pictured Robert standing there beside me, his arm around my shoulders, that easy smile that used to undo every worry I had. "You were right," I whispered. "You always were." In the distance, thunder rumbled, a soft reminder that even after storms, the world keeps turning. A week later, Ethan surprised me with an idea. "Mom," he said, "let's take the car out. Just a short drive. I want to see what it feels like." It took me a second to answer. "You really think we're ready for that?" He smiled faintly. "I think we need it." We drove out past the city, following the same winding road Robert used to take when he tested the engine after a tune-up. The air rushed in through the windows, cool and clean. I watched Ethan's hands on the wheel, steady now, deliberate. The world blurred into shades of green and gold. For the first time in months, I didn't feel weighed down by memory. At a red light, Ethan turned to me. "You know, I don't think she ever really loved me. But she taught me something." "What's that?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "That love without respect is just another form of theft." The light turned green, and the Mustang moved forward, smooth as breath. I looked at him and felt something settle in me, an old ache turning into peace. When we got home, the sky had turned pink with the evening. Ethan parked the car perfectly in its place and handed me the keys. "Your turn," he said. I looked at the keys, the metal still warm from his hand. "No," I said. "Ours." The wind carried the scent of cut grass and gasoline. It felt like the world was finally ready to be lived in again. Some people measure strength by how loudly they fight. I've learned it's sometimes measured by how gently you begin again. A few days later, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a blank notebook. For months, my life had been consumed by loss, discovery, and survival. Now that the noise had quieted, the silence felt unfamiliar. The Mustang gleamed outside in the driveway, no longer a relic of grief, but a symbol of everything that had been saved. I wanted to capture it somehow, to make sense of how pain had led me here. So I began to write. The first sentence came slowly. He built a car, but what he really built was a map back to myself. I smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. Ethan came in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You're writing again?" "Trying," I said. "I used to keep journals before your father got sick. Then life got too loud to listen to myself." He sat across from me, sipping his coffee. "What are you writing about?" "Us," I said simply. "What we lost, what we found, the price of silence." He nodded, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You sound like Dad." That's the best compliment you could give me. For the next few weeks, we settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. We cooked dinner together, worked in the yard, argued over radio stations, and learned to laugh again. Healing didn't arrive like a wave. It came in quiet pieces, like fragments of sunlight sneaking through a half-closed curtain. One afternoon, while Ethan was at work, I drove the Mustang to the edge of town. The road curved through the mountains, a ribbon of gray surrounded by flaming red trees. I rolled the window down and let the wind whip through my hair. The sound of the engine filled the air, a deep, steady hum that felt like Robert speaking through the machine he'd loved. Halfway up the ridge, I stopped the car and stepped out. The valley spread below me, a wash of autumn colors fading into blue mist. I stood there, breathing in the view, and whispered, "We made it, Robert." The air didn't answer, but the peace that came over me felt like his response. That night, when Ethan came home, I told him about the drive. He smiled, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes. "You're sure you're okay being out there alone?" I laughed softly. "Your father taught me to drive that car. I think I can handle a mountain road." He grinned. "Fair enough. You know, I was thinking, maybe we should take it to a car show. There's one in Charlotte next month. Dad always wanted to enter it." The suggestion caught me off guard. For years, that car had been sacred, a monument to what I'd lost. But now, maybe it could be something else. "You think we're ready for that?" "I think we owe it to him," Ethan said, "to finish what he started." A quiet pride filled my chest. "Then let's do it." We spent the next few days polishing every inch of the Mustang, cleaning the chrome, detailing the interior until it looked like sunlight could live in it. I watched Ethan move around the car with focus, the way Robert once had. There was something healing in that symmetry, history repeating itself, but kinder this time. On the morning of the show, Ethan loaded a small framed photo of Robert into the car. He placed it on the dashboard. "He should come with us," he said. I smiled. He already is. As we drove toward Charlotte, the highway stretched endlessly ahead. The hum of the tires, the warmth of the sun, the quiet between us, all of it felt like a prayer. Somewhere between the hills and the horizon, I realized something. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming joy. We arrived at the show and parked among rows of polished classics. People stopped to look, admiring the Mustang, asking about its restoration. Ethan told them proudly, "My dad built it. My mom kept it alive." And for the first time, those words didn't sting. They felt right. When the announcer called our number, I stood beside Ethan as the crowd clapped politely. We didn't win any trophies that day, but it didn't matter. The reward was standing there together, no longer defined by what we had lost, but by what we had found again: respect, forgiveness, and a shared strength that had survived every test. On the drive home, as dusk settled, Ethan looked at me and said, "Mom, I think Dad would be proud." I smiled through the glow of the dashboard lights. "He is," I said. He always was. The road ahead curved gently through the trees, and the car's reflection shimmered in the glass of twilight. I realized that grief hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its shape, becoming the quiet companion that reminds you how much love once lived here. Some journeys don't take you somewhere new. They take you back to yourself. The night after the car show, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet. Ethan had gone back to his apartment, and the air carried that faint scent of wax and gasoline from the freshly polished Mustang. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the light of the street lamp spilling across the kitchen floor. It felt strange, after everything, to have peace as my only company. For so long I had lived in reaction, to grief, to betrayal, to fear. Now there was only stillness, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. I pulled out Robert's letter again, the one I had practically memorized. The paper had softened with all my rereading, the edges worn like the corners of a well-loved photograph. His words were steady as ever. "If you're holding this, then you've already faced something I never could. Don't let pain shrink you. Let it polish you instead." I thought about that word, polish. Robert used to say the same thing whenever he worked on the car. "You don't hide the scratches," he'd tell Ethan. "You smooth them until they catch the light differently." That was what I had been doing all along, I realized. Not erasing what happened, but changing how it reflected back at me. The next morning, I drove out to the old overlook again, the place where Robert and I used to watch thunderstorms roll across the valley. The Mustang's engine purred like contentment itself. When I parked, I took the framed photo of Robert from the dashboard and set it on the hood. "Do you see us now?" I said aloud. "Your boy finally learned what love really means, and I think I did too. The wind brushed my hair, and for a heartbeat, I could almost hear his laughter, the quiet, patient kind that always reached me before his words did. On the way home, I stopped at a small roadside diner, the kind Robert used to love. The waitress called everyone sweetheart and poured coffee until the cup trembled. I watched the ordinary lives around me, truck drivers, young couples, a family sharing pancakes, and I realized how long it had been since I'd noticed the beauty in small things. Grief had blinded me, betrayal had hardened me, but survival had given me new eyes. The world didn't look softer, it looked more honest. That afternoon, I invited Ethan over for dinner. He arrived with flowers, simple daisies, my favorite. "No reason," he said shyly, setting them in a jar. We ate quietly, both aware of the peace between us. Afterward, he helped me clean up, humming one of Robert's old songs. When the dishes were done, we stood by the open window, the sound of crickets spilling into the room. "You know," Ethan said, "I've been thinking about selling my apartment and moving back here for a while. Maybe help you keep the place up." I smiled. "You don't have to do that, Ethan." "I know," he said, "but I want to. It feels right." And somehow, it did. Not as penance, but as presence, as the slow, quiet mending of something that had been broken for too long. Later that night, after he'd gone, I walked to the garage once more. I ran my hand over the Mustang's hood and felt the faint warmth it still held from the afternoon sun. The keys hung neatly on the hook where Robert used to keep them. I placed my hand there for a moment, whispering, "Thank you." The car gleamed in the dim light, the reflection of my face blending with Robert's photo on the dashboard. We were together in a way time couldn't undo. As I turned to leave, I caught my own reflection in the small window, a woman older, yes, but stronger, calmer, and unafraid of silence. The years had taken many things from me, but they had given me something greater, the ability to stand inside my own life and call it mine. Some endings don't need to announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like peace settling into the corners of a home once full of noise. Spring arrived early that year, washing Asheville in pale gold light and the scent of blooming dogwoods. The days felt cleaner, more breathable. I started waking before sunrise, making coffee, opening the garage door, and watching the light spill over the Mustang's curves. The car no longer reminded me of grief. It reminded me of growth. Every reflection in its surface was a version of myself that had survived something hard and found a way to keep shining. Ethan's visits became part of my routine. He would stop by after work, covered in dust from construction sites, with that quiet guilt still lingering behind his eyes. But there was gratitude there now, too, a humility that hadn't existed before. We didn't talk much about Sabrina anymore. The court case had taken on its own life in the background, and the newspapers had already moved on to the next story. But I could tell the scars remained. One afternoon, Ethan found me sanding one of Robert's old cabinets in the garage. "You're always working on something," he said, smiling. "It's how I stay steady," I replied. "Your father used to say, 'Movement keeps sorrow from settling.'" He picked up a spare sheet of sandpaper and joined me. "I guess that's why he was always in here," he said. He wasn't fixing things. He was fixing himself. We worked in silence for a while, the sound of sandpaper against wood filling the air like a heartbeat. After a moment, Ethan said quietly, "Mom, do you think Dad knew she'd go after me like that?" I set the sandpaper down and looked at him. He didn't know how far it would go, but he knew enough to leave me clues. He trusted I'd find them when I was ready. Ethan nodded slowly. "He trusted you more than he trusted himself." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he just understood that women like me don't crumble forever. We bend until we remember who we are." Ethan smiled faintly. "You really think you've forgiven me?" "Yes," I said, "because forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about deciding it won't control us anymore." He swallowed hard. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not," I said, smiling, "but it's worth the work." That evening, we sat on the porch as the sky shifted from pink to lavender. Fireflies rose from the grass like tiny sparks. For the first time, Ethan spoke about the aftermath of everything, the embarrassment, the whispers from friends, the fear that he'd never be trusted again. "I feel like I ruined our family name," he said. "You didn't," I told him. "You just gave us another chapter. We'll decide how it's read." He nodded, leaning back against the railing. "You think Dad would forgive me?" "He already did," I said softly. "That's what love is. It forgives before the apology arrives." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of the evening. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's wind chime played a soft tune. Later, after Ethan left, I stayed outside, letting the night fold around me. The air was warm, the stars faint, but steady. I thought about how much had changed in a single year, how I had gone from being a woman buried under obligation and heartbreak to someone who had found her strength in the ruins. Inside, the house glowed with a soft lamplight. On the wall hung the photograph from the car show. Ethan and me standing beside the Mustang, sunlight in our faces, peace in our posture. I had framed it that morning and placed it where Robert's tools once hung, not as a monument to pain, but as a reminder that we had made it through. Before going to bed, I walked to the garage one last time. The air inside was still and warm, carrying the faint scent of wax and cedar. I sat in the driver's seat, running my hand along the steering wheel. "We did it, Robert," I whispered. "You can rest now." The sound of night insects drifted in through the open door. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to hold on to the past. It was finally holding me instead. Some chapters close with thunder, others with a whisper that says, "You've survived. Now live." I started keeping Robert's letter on my nightstand instead of hidden in a drawer. I no longer needed it to remember him. I just liked knowing it was close. The words that once felt like a mystery now read like a blessing. I'd stopped rereading the part about Sabrina's lies. What I returned to, night after night, was the line that said, "Keep your dignity, Maggie. It's the only form of wealth no one can steal." I had spent most of my life mistaking endurance for strength. But surviving something isn't the same as living after it. That was the lesson I was trying to learn now. It had been 3 months since Sabrina's sentencing. The newspapers had stopped calling, and the courthouse buzz had faded. Ethan was rebuilding his reputation at work, saving money, trying to move forward. He'd joined a community volunteer group restoring old homes. He said it made him feel closer to his father. I think it made him feel closer to himself. I visited him one Saturday morning at one of the job sites. The air smelled of sawdust and early spring. Ethan was painting a window frame, his shirt spattered with white. When he saw me, he smiled, a real smile, unguarded. "You didn't have to come all this way." "I wanted to see what you're building," I said. He laughed softly. "It's not much, just a few repairs." I looked around at the half-finished house. That's how every restoration starts. He paused, lowering the paintbrush. "You know, Mom, I think Dad would have liked this work. It's patient, honest." "He would have loved it," I said. He always believed fixing things was a form of prayer. We shared a quiet moment before he asked, "Do you still think about her?" "Not often," I said. "And when I do, it's not with anger anymore. It's pity. She built her whole life on pretending to be someone people could trust. But you can't fake peace, Ethan. It shows." He nodded slowly. "I guess she taught us something after all." "Yes," I said. "She taught us what we'll never be." That night, I returned home to the house Robert built. I cooked myself a small dinner, just eggs and toast, simple and comforting. While I ate, I thought about how strange it was that calm could feel like a luxury. After everything, the quiet no longer frightened me. It felt deserved. After dinner, I stepped into the garage. The evening light slanted through the window, landing across the hood of the Mustang. Dust floated through the air like gold. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and listened to the steady rhythm. That sound, deep, grounded, alive, was the same heartbeat that had carried me through the worst. I closed my eyes and let the vibration hum through me. "We made it, Robert," I whispered. "You, me, and the boy. We're still standing." The next morning, I wrote another page in my notebook. Not about loss this time, but about grace. I wrote, "Freedom isn't forgetting what hurt you. It's remembering it without flinching." Ethan called later that day to tell me his group had finished the restoration on that old house. "It passed inspection," he said proudly. "The family moves in next week." I could hear the smile in his voice, the lightness that had been missing for so long. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," I said. "I'm proud of us," he replied. We didn't let her destroy us. After the call, I sat on the porch and watched the evening settle over the mountains. The light turned soft, the color of old honey. I thought about how much I had lost and how much I had found in the same lifetime. Pain had stripped everything unnecessary away, leaving only what mattered: respect, courage, and the quiet satisfaction of having chosen myself at last. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the keeper of Robert's memory. I felt like its continuation. Some people think healing is a finish line. I've learned it's more like a slow, steady drive with the windows open, the past in the rearview mirror, and the wind reminding you that you're still here. Summer arrived soft and golden, spreading warmth through the mountains and coaxing every garden in Asheville into bloom. I found myself spending more time outdoors, tending to the flowers Robert had planted years ago. He used to joke that gardening was therapy for people who couldn't sit still. I finally understood what he meant. Pulling weeds, pruning, watering, it was all a kind of conversation with the earth, a quiet exchange between what's been lost and what insists on growing anyway. Ethan came by one afternoon carrying a cardboard box. "Got something for you," he said, setting it on the porch table. Inside was a collection of photographs, old ones, prints I hadn't seen in years. "Where did you find these?" I asked. "In the attic," he said. "They were in one of Dad's tool chests. Thought you'd want to see them." I sifted through the stack. Robert in his work shirt, grinning beside the half-restored Mustang. Ethan at 14, hands covered in grease, his first big smile after getting the engine to start. One of the three of us at the county fair, sunlight in our hair, the car behind us with a handwritten sign that said, "Almost there." Looking at those photos, my chest ached, but not from pain. It was gratitude, thick and unexpected. "He'd love that you found these," I said. Ethan leaned back against the railing. "I think he left them for you to find eventually." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he just knew we'd need reminders that we were once happy before everything fell apart." We sat quietly, the summer air heavy with the hum of cicadas. The kind of silence that used to feel empty now felt full, like the space between two heartbeats. "Mom," Ethan said after a while, "I've been thinking about selling my truck." "Why?" "I want to buy something I can fix up," he said. "Maybe a project car, like Dad had. I want to learn properly this time." The pride that swelled in my chest was sharp and sweet. "Then let's find one together," I said. "We'll rebuild it right here in this garage." He smiled, that same crooked grin Robert used to have when he knew something would make me proud. "You'd help?" "Of course," I said. "That's what family does. We build, we repair, we start over." That evening, after Ethan left, I took the box of photos inside and spread them across the table. They formed a timeline of love, proof that despite everything, our story had always been about creation, not destruction. Later, I drove to the overlook one more time. The road curved gently beneath the open sky, the same path Robert and I had driven countless times. I parked at the ridge and stepped out into the warm evening air. Below, the valley shimmered with the light of small towns waking up for the night. I took a deep breath and said aloud, "We're okay, Robert. You can rest easy." The wind answered in its soft, steady way, brushing my hair back as if in agreement. When I got home, I found a small package in the mailbox. It was from Michael Grant. Inside was a polished metal emblem, the same one that had once adorned the Mustang's original grille before Robert replaced it. There was a note attached. "Every car has a story, Margaret. Some just take longer to finish." I held the emblem in my palm, its smoothness cool against my skin. Then I walked into the garage and mounted it on the wall above Robert's workbench. It gleamed under the single hanging bulb, simple but strong, a perfect tribute to everything we had survived. That night, as the house grew quiet, I sat by the open window, letting the summer air drift in. The world outside hummed with life: crickets, frogs, a distant train. And for the first time since Robert's death, I felt that rare kind of peace that doesn't ask for permission. Some promises outlive the people who made them. They stay behind, written in steel, in love, in the hands of those who finally understand what it means to keep them. August brought long afternoons heavy with sunlight and the smell of cut grass. The world had returned to its rhythm, but I was learning a new one, slow, steady, deliberate. I didn't rush through mornings anymore. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and let the light touch every corner of the house. It was as if peace had finally found its way home, unpacked its bags, and decided to stay a while. Ethan called most evenings. Sometimes we talked about work or the weather. Other times, we said almost nothing at all. There was comfort in that kind of quiet, the unspoken understanding that words weren't always needed. Our bond, once strained to breaking, had become something gentler, like a scar that no longer hurt when pressed. One Saturday, he came over with grease on his hands and hope in his eyes. "Found one," he said, grinning. "A project car." I followed him outside to see a faded blue 1972 Chevrolet Nova hitched to a trailer. The paint was dull, the fenders rusted, the tires nearly flat, but to us, it looked like possibility. I laughed. "You really don't make things easy, do you?" "Guess I take after Dad," he said. We unloaded it into the driveway, and the sound of the tires hitting concrete sent a pulse of excitement through me. It wasn't about the car, it was about the ritual, the chance to build something again with our hands and patience instead of anger and regret. Over the next weeks, the garage became our workshop once more. The smell of oil and paint filled the air, and the evenings stretched long with the rhythm of tools and quiet conversation. I found joy in small things. How Ethan wiped his hands the same way Robert once did. How he hummed under his breath when the work went well. How he smiled more now. One night, after we'd finished sanding the hood, he turned to me and said, "You know, Mom, when I sold Dad's car, I thought I was freeing myself. I thought I was choosing my own life, but I wasn't free. I was lost." I set down the sandpaper and looked at him. "Freedom doesn't mean running away, Ethan. It means facing what you've done and still choosing to try again." He nodded, eyes bright in the dim light. "You think Dad would forgive me?" I smiled softly. "He already has. He left us the car, the clues, the lessons." That was his way of saying he believed we'd find our way back. We worked in silence after that, both of us caught in the rhythm of memory and redemption. The night air slipped through the open door, carrying the smell of summer rain and cut wood. It felt like Robert was there, not haunting the space, but blessing it. As the weeks passed, we made progress. The car began to take shape, panel by panel. Sometimes the work was slow, frustrating even, but I found comfort in the process. It reminded me that healing isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's just steady hands and patient time. Ethan began to talk more about the future. "I've been thinking about starting my own shop," he said one evening. "Nothing big, just restorations. Maybe call it Hayes Garage, like Dad always wanted." The idea made me smile. "He'd like that," I said, "and so would I." "You'd help with the books?" he asked. "Of course," I said, "but only if I get to pick the music." He laughed, and the sound filled the garage, warm and familiar. For a moment, I could almost hear Robert laughing too, the three of us together again in that shared rhythm of purpose. When the Nova's engine finally turned over for the first time, Ethan whooped like a boy, and I clapped my hands, tears slipping down my cheeks. It wasn't just an engine starting, it was our story restarting, a second chance born from everything that had tried to destroy us. After he left that night, I stayed in the garage a while longer. The air was still and sweet, heavy with the scent of progress. I looked around at the tools, the photos, the cars, and realized how far we'd come. From silence to truth, from betrayal to restoration. Some legacies aren't about what you leave behind, but what you teach people to rebuild after you're gone. Robert had taught us that. And now, finally, we were living it. September crept in quietly, carrying cooler air and that soft golden light that makes everything look half-remembered. The Nova sat in the driveway, freshly painted a deep midnight blue. Ethan called it a second life. I called it proof that some stories can end better than they began. The sound of its engine rumbling through the neighborhood made me smile every time. It wasn't just a car starting. It was our family's pulse returning to rhythm. One evening, Ethan came by with takeout and a question that hung in the air like music before a first note. "Mom," he said carefully, "what do you think about reopening Dad's old workshop officially? Not just as a hobby, as a business. Hayes Restorations." I looked at him, surprised and proud all at once. "You really want that responsibility?" He nodded. "I think I'm ready. And I want you to be my partner. You've been holding this family together for decades. It's time we build something in your name, too." His words cracked something open inside me, not pain this time, but joy so raw it almost hurt. "Then we'll do it," I said. "But this time, we set rules, balance, respect. We build this with limits, not exhaustion." Ethan smiled. "Deal." Over the following weeks, we cleaned out the workshop. Dust, cobwebs, and remnants of the past fell away under new light. I painted the front sign myself, white letters against dark wood. Hayes Restorations, classic cars and honest work. When we hung it above the door, the sun hit it just right, and I could almost see Robert's grin in that light. Business started slow. A neighbor brought an old pickup in for repainting. Then another man came by with a rusted Harley-Davidson. Word spread quietly, one satisfied customer at a time. But I didn't care about the money. What mattered was the rhythm of life returning, tools clinking, engines rumbling, coffee brewing in the mornings. One afternoon, as Ethan adjusted a carburetor, he said, "You know, I used to think Dad's perfectionism drove him crazy. Now I get it. It wasn't about control. It was about care." I smiled. That's what restoration really is, loving something enough to give it another chance. He glanced up. "That's what you did for me." I didn't answer. I just reached over and squeezed his shoulder. Sometimes silence carries more truth than words ever can. As autumn deepened, the garage filled with warmth, radiator heat, laughter, the faint hum of old country songs on the radio. There were moments I'd catch Ethan wiping his hands on the same rag Robert once used, and I'd have to turn away before the emotion overflowed. But they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were gratitude, pure, steady, unashamed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, Ethan turned to me. "Mom," he said softly, "you're the strongest person I know." I laughed quietly. I used to think strength meant holding everything together. Now I know it means knowing what to let go of. He nodded. "Then maybe we're both stronger than we were." We locked up the garage and stood outside in the cooling air. The sky had turned a shade of orange, Robert would have called engine glow. For a long time, we didn't speak. The world felt full, whole, finally still. Later that night, I sat alone on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders. The house hummed gently behind me. I thought of the path that had led me here, the betrayals, the revelations, the courage it took to put an end to what was wrong and start again. Life had not been kind, but it had been just, and that was enough. I whispered into the dark. "You were right, Robert. Justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from living without fear." The wind rustled the trees in answer. Somewhere in that sound, I heard peace. Some stories don't end with revenge or loss. They end with quiet triumph, the kind that hums like an engine in perfect tune, steady, sure, and finally, free. October brought crisp mornings and the kind of sunlight that felt older, softer, like it had learned something about forgiveness, too. The trees along the edge of Asheville began to turn, painting the town in amber and rust. From my kitchen window, I could see the new workshop sign gleaming in the cool air. Every time I looked at it, A quiet pride stirred in my chest. It wasn't the pride of achievement, it was the pride of endurance. Ethan had thrown himself into the business with the same focus Robert once had. Customers came and went, and each engine that roared back to life felt like another piece of our family being restored. I handled the paperwork, the scheduling, and the coffee brewing, which somehow always ended up tasting better when the smell of oil lingered in the air. One morning, while I was sweeping the front porch, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A tall woman stepped out, dressed neatly, holding a folder. For a moment my pulse quickened, old habits of fear, but then she smiled, calm and kind. "Mrs. Hayes?" she asked. "Yes. My name's Tara Lawson. I'm with the district attorney's office. I wanted to give you an update on the case." She handed me the folder. Inside were official documents, letters of restitution, final statements, and a court order transferring the remaining funds from Sabrina's seized accounts to me and Ethan. The total wasn't enormous, but it was enough to cover the debts and keep the shop secure for a few years. I stared at the number, then looked up at her. "So it's finished?" She nodded. "Completely. She won't be able to contact you or your son again. She's serving 12 years with no parole." The words landed gently, like the last raindrop after a storm. I thanked her, and she left with a polite smile. I stood there for a long moment, folder in hand, listening to the hum of the workshop behind me. Inside, Ethan was bent over a bright cherry-red convertible, humming to himself. I watched him work for a while before saying, "The case is officially closed." He looked up, eyes wide. "You're serious?" I nodded. "We can finally let it rest." He leaned back against the workbench and let out a long breath. "Feels strange, doesn't it? Like we've been running so long we forgot how to stop." "It's not stopping," I said. "It's standing still long enough to see what we built." He smiled. "You should be proud, Mom." "I am," I said, "but I'm prouder that we didn't let hate win." That afternoon, we closed the shop early and took the Mustang out for a drive. The road wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains, leaves swirling like sparks of gold around us. Ethan drove while I leaned back in the passenger seat, the wind teasing my hair, the sun warm on my face. For the first time in a long while, I didn't think about what we had lost. I thought about what we had become. We stopped at the overlook, the same one where Robert used to bring me when life felt too heavy. The valley stretched below, a sea of light and shadow. I placed my hand on the dashboard. "He'd love this," I said. Ethan smiled. "He's here, always has been." We stood there in the quiet, the car humming softly behind us. I thought about how every person leaves something behind. Sometimes it's pain, sometimes it's love, and sometimes, if you're lucky, it's both, teaching you how to tell the difference. On the drive home, Ethan turned to me. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking about mentoring some local kids, show them how to work on cars, maybe keep them out of trouble." I looked at him, heart swelling. "That's exactly what your father would have done." He grinned. "Then I guess I'm on the right path." The sky darkened to a soft purple as we reached the house. When we parked, the garage light flickered on automatically, spilling its familiar glow across the floor. It didn't look empty anymore. It looked alive. That night, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, I realized something quiet and certain. Justice had already been served long before the court said so. It came the moment Ethan and I chose truth over silence, courage over comfort, and love over bitterness. Some storms don't end with thunder. They end with a sky clear enough to see where you're going next. By November, the first chill of winter had begun to creep down from the mountains, curling through the valleys like a memory that didn't want to fade. I'd started wearing Robert's old flannel shirts when I worked in the garage, soft from years of use, still faintly smelling of sawdust and pine. The business was steady now, the rhythm of our days shaped by the comforting noises of engines, music, and conversation. One afternoon, as I was sorting through receipts, Ethan poked his head into the office. "You've got a visitor," he said, eyes curious. I looked up, puzzled. "Who is it?" He shrugged, said his name's Tommy Benton, claims he's Sabrina's brother. The name hit like a cold draft through an open door. For a moment, the air seemed to thin around me. "Send him in," I said quietly. A tall man entered, mid-40s, clean-shaven, his eyes tired but not unkind. He carried a small envelope. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "thank you for seeing me. I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to meet." I studied him for a moment. He didn't look like her. Not really, but there was something in his expression, a mixture of shame and hope, that made me lower my guard. "Why are you here?" He handed me the envelope. "Closure. I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. My sister, she's been sick a long time. Not just mentally, addiction too. Our family tried to help, but she cut us off years ago. When I read about her arrest, I realized how far she'd fallen. I just needed to say she wasn't always that way." I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph, 2 children, barefoot on a beach, holding kites. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "Tommy and Laura, Summer, 1989. He continued, voice trembling. "I can't undo what she did to you or your husband, but I wanted you to know she wasn't born a liar. Life broke her early, and she never figured out how to heal." I looked down at the photo again. The girl's smile, wide and unguarded, didn't match the woman who'd nearly destroyed our family. "I appreciate you coming," I said softly. "And I'm sorry for your loss too. Because that's what this is, isn't it? You lost her long before we met her." He nodded, tears gathering at the edges of his eyes. "You're kinder than I expected." "I'm tired of hate," I said. "It's a heavy thing to carry." He smiled faintly, then extended his hand. "Thank you for forgiving a part of her I couldn't." When he left, Ethan stood quietly in the doorway. "You okay?" I held up the photo. "She had a brother." He frowned. "Do you believe him?" "Yes," I said, "and I think your father would have wanted me to. Some truths don't excuse anything, but they help you understand the shape of a wound." Ethan nodded, his gaze softening. "You always find a way to see people deeper than I can." "It's not depth," I said. "It's distance. Once you stop bleeding, you can finally look at the knife." We worked in silence after that, the hum of the heater filling the air. But the encounter stayed with me. That night, I placed the photo inside Robert's letter, between the pages that spoke of justice and mercy. It didn't belong there because it fit. It belonged because it reminded me how easily pain passes from one hand to another if no one decides to stop it. The next morning, I woke early and drove the Mustang up the mountain road. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky with streaks of gold and gray. When I reached the overlook, I turned off the engine and stepped out. The cold bit at my face, but I felt strangely alive. I pulled the photograph from my coat pocket and looked at it again. 2 children, unaware of what life would take from them. I whispered, "I forgive you, Laura, not because you deserve it, but because I do." Then I tucked the picture under a stone and let the wind carry the rest. When I returned home, the garage door was open, and Ethan was already at work. He looked up and smiled, grease on his cheek. "Where'd you go?" "For a drive," I said. "To finish something your father started." He tilted his head. "And did you?" "Yes," I said. Finally. That evening, the first snow of the season began to fall, thin and tentative. I stood by the window, watching it dust the yard, feeling no bitterness, no fear, only peace. Some goodbyes aren't loud. They're a whisper to the past that says, "You don't own me anymore." The snow didn't last long in Asheville, just a thin lace over the roofs that melted by morning. But it changed the way the world sounded. Everything was hushed, clean, unhurried. I liked that kind of silence, the one that didn't demand anything. I'd spent too many years filling quiet moments with worry. Now, silence felt like proof that the noise had finally passed. Ethan arrived that morning with 2 cups of coffee and a grin. "We're officially booked out for 3 months," he said, handing me one. "People love what we're doing." I smiled. "Your father would be proud. He'd probably complain about the wiring and redo half my work," he joked. "True," I said, laughing, "but he'd still be proud." Business had become more than survival. It was connection. Every customer brought a story, an old car tied to a grandfather, a motorcycle left behind by a friend, a pickup that had seen better decades. They all wanted the same thing, restoration, not just of metal, but of memory. And in helping them, Ethan and I were still restoring ourselves. Around noon, we took a break and sat outside on the tailgate of an old truck we were refurbishing. The air was sharp, our breaths visible in little clouds. Ethan leaned back, watching the mountains. "You ever think about what comes next?" I sipped my coffee. "I used to," I said. "Now I just wake up and live what's in front of me." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "You think Dad knew how strong you'd be?" "I think he always did," I said. I just had to prove it to myself. Later that afternoon, a young woman came by the shop, a college student, probably in her 20s, asking if we could restore her grandfather's old truck. Her name was Claire, and her voice trembled when she talked about him. "He taught me how to drive," she said. "He died last year. I want to keep something of him alive." I looked at Ethan, and he smiled knowingly. "We'll take care of it," he said. After she left, I turned to him. "You know why this works?" "Because you're the best bookkeeper in North Carolina?" he teased. I laughed. "Because we understand loss. We don't just fix cars, Ethan. We fix what people thought they'd never get back." That evening I stayed late after closing. The workshop was quiet except for the ticking of the cooling engines. The smell of metal and dust filled the air. I looked around at the rows of vehicles, each one a fragment of someone's story, and thought about how far we'd come. From that first day I found the garage empty to this, a space full of purpose. I took Robert's old screwdriver from my pocket, the one I kept on my necklace all these years, and turned it in my hand. The metal was worn smooth, the grooves faint. It wasn't shiny anymore, but it didn't need to be. It had done its work. When Ethan came back in, he found me sitting by the Mustang, tracing the hood with my fingers. "You okay, Mom?" "I am," I said. "Completely." He smiled. "Then come on, let's close up. I'll make dinner tonight." "Dinner? You?" "Don't sound so surprised. I've learned a few things." I followed him out, laughing softly. The air was cold, the stars sharp above us. As we locked the door, I looked back at the workshop one last time before turning off the lights. The glow faded, but what it represented didn't. That night, over dinner, Ethan talked about expanding the business, maybe opening a second location one day. I listened proud, knowing this was what legacy looked like. Not inheritance, but transformation. After he left, I stepped outside with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The moon hung low over the mountains, silver and steady. I whispered into the stillness, "We made it, Robert. Every part of your dream found its way home." The wind stirred the trees as if to answer, soft and sure. Some nights don't ask for celebration. They ask for gratitude and for the strength to keep choosing peace when chaos finally runs out of things to take. By December, the mountains were white again. The first real snow blanketed the rooftops, softening every edge of the world. I woke early that morning to the quiet thrum of the heater and the smell of coffee. Outside, everything was still, as if the earth had paused to take a deep breath. I wrapped myself in Robert's old coat and stepped onto the porch. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but it felt good, sharp, alive, honest. The Mustang sat in the driveway, dusted with snow, looking like a memory wrapped in winter light. I brushed a thin layer from the windshield and smiled at my reflection. I wasn't the same woman who had found that empty garage months ago. That woman had been broken by loss and blinded by loyalty. This one had learned the beauty of limits, the strength of letting go. Ethan arrived not long after, cheeks red from the cold. "You're up early," he said, carrying a box. "I couldn't sleep," I said. "What's that?" He grinned. "Christmas decorations. Thought we'd do it right this year." It had been years since we'd put up a tree together. The last time was before Robert got sick. The thought made my chest ache, but not with sadness, just the gentle pull of memory. "All right," I said. "Let's make the house glow again." We spent the morning untangling lights, laughing at ourselves for forgetting how. When we finally plugged them in, the whole room came alive with color. Ethan stood back, hands on his hips. "Not bad, huh?" "Perfect," I said. "Your father would have hated the blinking lights." "Then we'll leave them on extra long," he teased. Later, while Ethan ran to the store, I sat by the tree with a box of ornaments. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue, was one Robert had made the year Ethan was born. A small glass bulb with Hayes Family, 1989, painted in shaky white letters. I hung it near the top, where the light caught it just right. When Ethan came back, he carried a small wrapped box and set it in my lap. "Go on, open it." Inside was a delicate silver keychain shaped like a tiny Mustang. On the back, engraved in small letters, were the words, "For everything you held together." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Ethan," he shrugged, smiling softly. "Just wanted you to know I see it now, all of it." I pulled him into a hug, the kind that says more than words ever could. For a moment, I could almost feel Robert's arms around both of us, steady and proud. That night after Ethan left, I sat in the glow of the tree lights, holding the keychain in my palm. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world into peace. I thought of Robert, his laughter, his patience, his faith that love, when true, always finds a way to rebuild. The phone rang once. It was Michael Grant calling to wish me a Merry Christmas. "How's that shop of yours doing?" he asked. "Thriving," I said. "You helped start something good, Michael." He chuckled. "Your husband started it. You finished it." After the call, I returned to the window and watched the flakes swirl beneath the porch light. Each one landed softly, quietly, without asking for attention. It reminded me of how healing really works. Not loud, not sudden, but in small, quiet accumulations until one day you realize the ground beneath you has changed. Before bed, I walked to the garage. The Mustang gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. I ran my hand across the hood, cold and smooth, and whispered, "Merry Christmas, love. You'd be proud of our boy." The air seemed to hum with warmth, despite the chill. I turned off the light, knowing I didn't need to see the car to feel its presence. It had become part of the house, part of us, part of me. Some winters don't bring loneliness. They bring peace, dressed in white, reminding you that even after the hardest seasons, the heart can still find its way home. New Year's Eve arrived quiet and clear, the kind of night that carries both endings and beginnings in the same breath. The sky above Asheville shimmered faintly with distant fireworks, soft bursts of color reflected on the thin snow outside. Inside, the house glowed with a steady warmth. I had cooked a simple dinner, roast chicken, potatoes, and a peach cobbler Robert used to love. The scent filled every corner, wrapping the home in memory and comfort. Ethan arrived just after 8, cheeks red from the cold, carrying a bottle of sparkling cider. "Figured we'd celebrate properly," he said with a grin. "We?" I teased. "You mean you, me, and your father's ghost?" He laughed. "Exactly. Family tradition." We ate slowly, talking about the year behind us, the car show, the workshop, the repairs that turned into conversations, and the customers who had become friends. Every story circled back to the same quiet truth. We had rebuilt more than machines. We had rebuilt ourselves. After dinner, we sat by the window, watching the faint lights over the town. "Hard to believe a year ago everything was falling apart," Ethan said. I nodded. "Sometimes things have to fall apart so you can see what's worth rebuilding." He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You know, Mom, I think Dad would have loved who you've become." The words caught me off guard. "Who I've become?" He smiled softly. "Someone who stopped surviving and started living." I turned toward the window, blinking back tears. Outside, the fireworks grew brighter, painting the snow in flashes of red and gold. "Maybe," I said quietly, but it took losing almost everything to understand how much we still had. Near midnight, we bundled up and walked out to the garage. The Mustang gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the red paint reflecting our faces. Ethan held up 2 mugs of cider. "To Dad," he said. "To love," I added, "the kind that outlasts the storm." We clinked mugs and drank in silence. The moment felt sacred, simple, honest, whole. As the clock struck 12, the town erupted with fireworks, the sound echoing through the valley. I closed my eyes, listening to the distant bursts, feeling each one settle into my chest like a heartbeat. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something I had to fear or chase. It just felt open. Ethan set his mug down and said, "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." I looked at him, startled by the sudden seriousness in his tone. "I met someone," he said. "Her name's Lily. She's kind, patient, nothing like—" He stopped, searching for the right words. I smiled gently. "Nothing like the past." He nodded. "Exactly. And I told her everything, about Dad, the car, even about what happened with Sabrina. I didn't want to start anything built on lies." I reached out and took his hand. "That's the best start you could give yourself." He exhaled, relief washing over his face. "I wanted you to be the first to know." I squeezed his hand. "Your father would be proud of that too." When he left later that night, I stayed in the garage a while longer. The house behind me was dark, except for the faint glow of the Christmas lights we hadn't yet taken down. I sat in the driver's seat of the Mustang and let my fingers trace the wheel. Outside, the fireworks faded, replaced by the hush of the new year settling in. I thought of Robert, not as the man I'd lost, but as the compass that had quietly guided me back to myself. His love hadn't ended when his heart stopped. It had become something larger, something that still moved through every act of courage, every moment of forgiveness. I whispered into the still air, "We made it, Robert. We're okay." The silence answered with peace. Some years begin with noise. Mine began with quiet. And in that quiet, I finally heard what love had been saying all along. You were never alone. A year after it all began, the house feels alive again. Not with noise or movement, but with balance. The air carries the smell of coffee, wood polish, and faint traces of motor oil drifting in from the workshop. Sometimes I still wake before dawn and listen to the silence, waiting for that first spark of light to touch the windows. It's my reminder that even after darkness, the world keeps its promise to start over. I often think about what Robert left behind, not the Mustang or the money, not even the evidence that exposed Sabrina's lies, but the way he believed in me. He knew I'd find the strength to face what needed to end, and that somehow, through it all, Ethan and I would come home to ourselves. His faith became my map. Ethan visits nearly every day now. He talks about opening a second Hayes Restoration someday, maybe teaching apprentices, maybe mentoring kids who remind him of himself. Watching him move through the world with humility instead of guilt fills me with quiet pride. The man who once sold his father's legacy for a trip across the ocean now builds new legacies with his own hands. That's redemption, patient, steady, earned. As for me, I've stopped apologizing for needing peace. I've learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's sacred. It's how dignity breathes. I spend my afternoons writing again, recording the stories I once thought were over. Stories about love that asks for truth, about betrayal that becomes wisdom, about how freedom begins when you stop explaining your worth to people who've already forgotten it. Sometimes customers at the workshop ask about the red Mustang. I tell them it's family history. What I don't tell them is that it's also a reminder, a promise that restoration is always possible, even after the worst kind of wreck. On warm evenings, I still take the car out along the Blue Ridge roads. The engine hums low, the wind slips through the open window, and I swear I can feel Robert's presence in the seat beside me. I talk to him like I used to. I tell him about the customers, about Ethan, about how the pain that once defined us now feels like a chapter in a larger story. A story about survival, respect, and the courage to keep choosing love even after it's broken you. The mountains fade behind me, the road stretches ahead, and I understand something simple and profound. We don't heal by forgetting. We heal by remembering differently. The past doesn't disappear. It just learns how to sit quietly beside us. If this story touched your heart, Please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these voices alive. And if you are ready for another powerful journey, click the story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next life story with love and respect.